until he saw the document I hid for years. You know that moment when you realize you've spent your entire life building something, sacrificing your own dreams, giving up everything for those you love, and suddenly someone looks you in the eyes and tells you you're worth nothing? Well, that's exactly what happened to me on a Sunday afternoon I'll never forget. My name is Helena. I'm 63 years old, and for decades I was that mother-in-law everyone thinks they know. That woman who lives at her daughter's house, who helps with the children, who washes the dishes after family lunch, who never complains, who's always there, silent, almost invisible. But what nobody knew, absolutely nobody, not even my own daughter Beatrice, is that I carried a secret so heavy that for years it kept me from sleeping properly. A document stored at the bottom of an old shoebox, inside my wardrobe, hidden under blankets I never use. And this document would change everything. But before I tell you about it, before revealing what was written on that paper yellowed by time, I need you to understand how I got there. How a woman who once had so much ended up being treated like a burden, like dead weight, in the cruel words of my son-in-law Ricardo. It all started 3 years ago, when my husband Antonio passed away. We had 41 years of marriage, a life built brick by brick, with much sweat and sacrifice. Antonio was a good man, hard-working, one of those who woke up before sunrise to ensure the family's livelihood. We had 3 children, but only Beatrice stayed here in the city. The other 2 went far away, followed their lives, and I understood, I really did, because we raised children for the world, not to remain tied to our apron strings. When Antonio left, it was as if a part of me had gone with him. You know? That emptiness that settles in your chest and seems like it will never go away. I was left alone in that big house, full of memories, every corner reminding me of him. And it was Beatrice who suggested I come live with her husband Ricardo, and my 2 grandchildren, 8-year-old Miguel and 5-year-old Isabella. At first I hesitated, because I'd always been an independent woman, always took care of my own life. But loneliness was consuming me, and I thought it would be good to be near my grandchildren, help Beatrice, who worked all day, contribute somehow. Ricardo seemed to agree at the time, even smiled when Beatrice made the invitation, said it would be great to have help with the children, and I, naive me, thought everything was fine. The first months were fairly calm. I adapted to the new rhythm of the house, woke up early to make breakfast, took the grandchildren to school, picked them up in the afternoon, helped with homework, made dinner, while Beatrice and Ricardo came home from work. I felt useful, you know. I felt I was contributing, that my presence there made a difference. But little by little, very gradually, I began to notice some things. First came the looks. Those looks that Ricardo would give me when I said something at the dinner table as if what I said had no importance whatsoever. Then came the subtle comments, almost imperceptible at first. Things like, "The light in your room was on all night, Helena. You know electricity is expensive, right?" Or, "You could use less water in the shower, the bill comes heavy." I would swallow hard, apologize, try to be even more careful, more invisible. I started taking 5-minute showers, turning off all the lights as soon as I left a room, eating less at meals so I wouldn't seem like I was weighing down the household budget. But none of this seemed to be enough for Ricardo. And look, I even tried to understand his side, really. After all, it was his house. He worked hard as a manager of a building material store, had his responsibilities, his bills to pay. And I was there, occupying a space, using resources. But at the same time, I wasn't standing still either, wasn't there, with my arms crossed waiting to be served. I took care of the entire house, cleaned, cooked, ironed clothes, cared for the children as if they were my own children again, and all this without receiving a single cent, without asking for anything in return, just for the love I had for my daughter and my grandchildren. But for Ricardo, apparently, none of this had value. For him, I was just an additional cost, a weight he had to carry. And as the months went by, these feelings of his became increasingly evident. He started making comments in front of the children, things like, "Your grandmother forgot to do this," or, "Your grandmother doesn't know how to do that properly," always diminishing me, always putting me in a place of incompetence. I would see the look of confusion on my grandchildren's faces, that innocence being tainted by their father's cruelty, and my heart would break into little pieces. Beatrice, poor thing, was always so tired, so overwhelmed with her work as a nurse, that she often didn't even notice what was happening right under her nose. Or perhaps she noticed and simply didn't know how to deal with the situation, caught between love for her mother and commitment to her husband. I never wanted to create problems in her marriage, never wanted to be a cause of discord, so I swallowed everything, kept each humiliation deep in my chest, put a smile on my face, and moved forward. But there's a limit to everything, you know. There's a limit to how much a person can endure before breaking completely. And for me, that limit came on that damned Sunday, the day that changed everything. It was Miguel's birthday. He was turning 8, and the house was full of people, relatives from both sides, friends of the children, that beautiful party that Beatrice had organized with so much care. I had spent the entire morning helping to decorate, prepare the snacks, organize everything, and I was exhausted, but happy because my grandson was radiant. In the middle of the party, I was in the kitchen washing some dishes that had already accumulated when I heard raised voices coming from the veranda. I immediately recognized Ricardo's voice, and he was talking to his brother-in-law, Maurizio. They didn't know I was there, didn't know I could hear every word they were saying, and that's when I heard it. Maurizio asked how things were at home, if everything was okay with the family, and Ricardo, with that tone of voice loaded with irritation that I knew so well, responded, "Oh man, it's difficult. Having Helena living here is weighing too much. As if the bills that are always increasing weren't enough. I still have to support another mouth. It's like having dead weight inside the house, you know? A person who doesn't contribute anything financially, just spends. Sometimes I even wonder how long I'm going to have to put up with this. Dead weight." Those 2 words echoed in my head like thunder. I froze there, with my hands plunged in soapy water, my heart beating so hard I thought it would explode. Tears began to run down my face, without me being able to control them. And in that moment, I felt a mixture of pain, anger, humiliation, and something else. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. A deep determination that this couldn't continue like this. But what hurt me most, what really destroyed me in that moment, was realizing that everything I had done, all my sacrifice, all my love, had no value whatsoever to that man. For him, I was just a negative number in his financial spreadsheet, a cost he would like to eliminate. And the worst part is that he said it so naturally, with so much disregard, as if I really were a useless, disposable object. I dried my tears with the back of my still wet hand, took a deep breath and made a decision right there. It was time to show who I really was. It was time to reveal what I had kept for so many years. It was time to make it clear that far from being dead weight, I was actually the person who was supporting much more than Ricardo could ever imagine. But I wasn't going to do it just anyway. Wasn't going to go out shouting or making a scene. No, I was going to wait for the right moment, plan each step, because some revelations need to be made with surgical precision to cause the necessary impact. That night, after all the guests had left, after the children went to sleep and the house finally fell silent, I went up to my room and opened that shoebox that held my secrets. My hands were shaking as I removed the blankets from the top, as I opened the worn lid and saw inside those documents I hadn't touched in years. The paper was yellowed, the edges a bit worn by time, but the words printed there were still perfectly legible, each letter representing a truth I had hidden for so long. I took the main document, the one that would change everything, and held it against my chest, feeling its weight in a way that went far beyond the physical. That paper represented years of my life, decades of silent work, of investments I had made without fanfare, of decisions I had made thinking about my family's future, especially my daughter, Beatrice's future. Let me explain something about me, about who I really am behind this image of a submissive and invisible mother-in-law. Before marrying Antonio, in the 80s, I worked as a secretary at an export company. It wasn't a glamorous job, but I was good at what I did, very good. I had a facility with numbers, with organization, with that attention to detail that makes all the difference in a business environment. It was at this company that I met a man named Roberto, one of the partners, who saw in me a potential that I didn't even know I had. Roberto taught me a lot about investments, about the financial market, about how to make money work for you instead of you only working for money. Of course, in the 80s, especially for a young woman, these conversations were rare, almost revolutionary. Most women of my generation were raised to marry, have children, take care of the house, and that's it. But Roberto planted a seed in my head, a seed that would germinate years later. When I married Antonio, I continued working for a few years, until our first child was born. Antonio earned reasonably well, but was never a man of financial vision, you know. He earned, spent on the necessary things, saved a little, but never thought about investing, about making that money grow. I, on the other hand, never forgot Roberto's lessons. I started little by little, saving small amounts from what I earned, without Antonio really knowing what I was doing. It wasn't out of distrust of him, but because I knew he wouldn't understand, would think it was too risky, would ask me to stop. I started investing in savings accounts, simple things. But gradually I learned more, took risks in other types of applications. This was in the 80s and 90s, a time of great economic instability in Brazil, with very high inflation, economic plans changing all the time, and I needed to be smart not to lose everything. And here's an important detail. I didn't do this thinking about myself, about having a life of luxury or ostentation. No, I did this thinking about my children's future, especially Beatrice, who was always the most attached to me, the one who needed my support the most. When she decided to study nursing, Antonio was worried about the costs, but I had saved enough money to pay for her entire undergraduate degree without squeezing our budget. When she wanted to do a specialization afterward, again it was I who financed it, without fanfare, without advertising. And when she and Ricardo decided to buy the house where they live today, 10 years ago, and were desperate because they couldn't get the down payment amount, guess who showed up with the money? That's right, me. I gave them 200,000 reais for the house down payment. Money I had accumulated over years of careful investments, silent sacrifices, intelligent financial decisions. But I never told Ricardo where this money came from. I let him believe it was an inheritance that Beatrice had received from a distant aunt, a story I invented to protect my privacy, because I've always been a reserved person who doesn't like to show off or expect recognition. And this was my big stupidity, my big mistake. I should have made it clear from the beginning that that money was mine, that I had worked for it, that I had been smart enough to multiply it. But no, I wanted to be discreet, wanted my daughter to have her own story of achievement without having to owe anything to her mother. What irony, isn't it? I wanted to be generous and invisible at the same time, and the result was that, years later, this same man who benefited from my generosity was calling me dead weight, as if I had never contributed anything to his life. And the document I kept in that box? It was the proof of bank transfer of the 200,000 reais I had given to Beatrice, with my name as sender, my originating account, everything duly registered and stamped by the bank. Along with this proof, I had other documents, statements from my investment accounts showing that I still had a considerable amount saved, much more than Ricardo ever imagined. I also had property documents for 2 plots of land I had bought 20 years ago, in a region that at the time was remote, but today was in full appreciation. These plots were easily worth more than 1,000,000 reais today. Yes, this invisible mother-in-law, this dead weight that Ricardo despised, was actually a woman with considerable assets, built with intelligence, patience, and much work over decades. After that conversation I heard on the veranda, I spent the next 2 weeks observing everything with different eyes. Each disrespectful comment from Ricardo, each look of disdain, each time he treated me as if I were a nuisance, I mentally noted. I wanted to be absolutely sure that it hadn't been just a moment of venting, a moment of weakness. But no, that was what he really thought. He reinforced this view constantly, not only with me, but in the way he talked about me when he thought I wasn't listening. One day he commented to Beatrice that the bills had increased a lot since I went to live there, insinuating that I was to blame. Another day he complained that the car was using more gasoline, as if my rare outings were responsible for it. It was a constant campaign of devaluation, and I realized this wasn't going to change. Not unless I did something drastic. That's when I decided it was time to have a serious conversation with Beatrice. I chose a Saturday morning when Ricardo had gone out to play soccer with friends, and the children were at the other grandmother's house. I prepared a special coffee, the kind Beatrice loved, called her to sit with me in the kitchen and said we needed to talk. She immediately became worried, asked if I was okay, if something had happened. I held her hand and said, "Daughter, I need to tell you some things. Things I should have told you a long time ago, and I need you to listen to me until the end without interrupting me. Okay?" She agreed, that sweet look of hers fixed on me, and I began to tell. I told about my investments, about how I had been financially active and intelligent during all those years, about the money I had saved and multiplied. I saw her eyes widen in surprise, her mouth open in shock. She had no idea about any of this. Then I took the documents I had separated and placed them in front of her. The proof of transfer of the 200,000 reais, the statements from the investment accounts, the deeds to the land. Each paper I placed on the table was like a bomb exploding in her understanding of me, of our family history. "Mom, I didn't know any of this," she whispered, tears beginning to roll down her face. "Why did you never tell me?" I explained that I always wanted her to feel independent, to achieve things with her own merit, that I didn't want to seem like the controlling mother who uses money to manipulate her children, but that now I realized my silence had been a mistake, because it allowed some people to see me as someone without value, as a burden. And then I told her about what I had heard at Miguel's party, about Ricardo's words, about how he had called me dead weight. I saw her expression change from surprise to anger, that kind of anger only a daughter can feel when she sees her mother being disrespected. She wanted to get up immediately, wanted to call Ricardo, wanted to confront him that very instant. But I held her arm and asked for calm. "No, daughter," I said. "This isn't how we're going to solve this. I have a better plan, but I need your permission to execute it." She looked at me with that mixture of curiosity and apprehension, and I explained what I had in mind. She hesitated at first, thought maybe it was too much, but after thinking together about everything that had happened, about all the humiliations I had swallowed, she agreed. It would be a lesson Ricardo would never forget. The plan was simple but effective. That same week I would communicate that I had decided to leave their house, that I was going to rent an apartment for myself. But it wouldn't be just any apartment, it would be a nice apartment, well located, comfortable, something that would make it clear I had my own financial means. In addition, I would symbolically return the 200,000 reais, not in cash, because the house was already bought, and they probably had debts. But I would make it clear in a document that initial amount had come from me, and that, technically, I was co-owner of that property. This didn't mean I was going to take their house, far from it, but it meant that Ricardo would need to recognize that, far from being dead weight, I was actually one of the reasons why he had a roof over his head. Beatrice would help me in this revelation, would be on my side, because she herself was shocked with the discovery of everything I had done in silence for years. The following Monday, I started putting the plan into action. I looked for apartments to rent, visited some, chose a beautiful one, with 2 bedrooms in a quiet but central area. I signed the contract, paid 3 months in advance, and started organizing my move. Ricardo still didn't know anything, and I noticed he was even more relaxed, probably relieved thinking that soon I would get out of his way, one way or another. But the surprise was just beginning. I scheduled a family meeting, asked Beatrice to call Ricardo for a serious conversation, said it was about my future, and that I needed all of us to be together to hear what I had to say. He came with that expression of someone doing a favor, those people who think their time is too precious to be wasted on family conversations. We all sat in the living room, the children were at school. It was just us 3 adults. I had prepared everything carefully, had the documents organized in a folder, had mentally rehearsed what I was going to say. I started slowly, calmly, saying I had decided to leave their house, that I thought it was better for everyone that I had my own space. I saw Ricardo's eyes light up, an almost imperceptible smile forming at the corners of his mouth, and that gave me even more strength to continue. "But before I go," I continued, "I need to clarify some things because I think there have been misunderstandings over all these years." I took the first document from the folder, the proof of transfer of the 200,000 reais, and placed it on the coffee table, right in front of him. "This is the proof of the transfer I made 10 years ago, when you needed the down payment to buy this house. 200,000 reais, from my account to Beatrice's account. At the time I said it was an inheritance from an aunt, but it wasn't. It was my money. Money I saved and invested over years of work." I saw the color drain from Ricardo's face. He picked up the paper with trembling hands, eyes running over the printed lines, checking the information, the sender's name, the date, the amount. Is this true?" he asked Beatrice, who nodded silently, her eyes red from crying so much in the last conversations we had had. "It's true," she confirmed. "My mother told me everything a few days ago. I didn't know either." But I wasn't finished. I took the next documents, the bank statements, and placed them next to the first. "These are the statements from my current investment accounts. As you can see, I have a considerable amount saved, the result of decades of intelligent investments. And these, I took the land deeds, are 2 plots of land I bought 20 years ago that today are worth more than 1,000,000 reais. So, Ricardo, when you called me dead weight at Miguel's party, when you said I didn't contribute anything financially, you were completely wrong. In fact, without me, you would probably still be paying rent. The silence that settled in the room after my words was deafening. Ricardo was pale, sweating, his hands still holding those papers, as if they would burn his skin. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He tried again, and this time managed to whisper, "Helena, I didn't know. I never imagined." But I raised my hand, interrupting. "No, Ricardo. You didn't know because I chose not to tell, because I wanted my daughter to have her own story of success without having to carry the weight of owing something to her mother. But your problem wasn't not knowing about the money. Your problem was treating me as if I had no value at all. It was diminishing me constantly. It was making me feel like a burden, when in fact I took care of your house, your children, your life, without asking for anything in return except a minimum of respect. And that you denied me." Beatrice was crying openly now, and she turned to her husband with a hardness in her look that I had never seen before. "How could you, Ricardo? How could you treat my mother that way, after everything she did for us?" He tried to defend himself, stammering meaningless apologies, saying he was stressed with work, that it wasn't personal, that he never meant to disrespect anyone. But both Beatrice and I knew those were just empty excuses. The disrespect had been real, constant, systematic. It wasn't a moment of stress, it was who he really was when he thought he could be. And that revelation, those documents on the table, had taken away from him the illusion of superiority he had over me. Suddenly, I was no longer the dependent and invisible mother-in-law. I was a woman of resources, of intelligence, of capability, and he was going to have to deal with that. In the days following that meeting, the dynamics of the house changed completely. Ricardo could barely look at me, walked around the house like an embarrassed ghost, clearly processing everything he had discovered. He tried to approach a few times, tried to make conversation, offer help with the things I was packing for the move. But I maintained a polite distance. It wasn't time for easy reconciliation, wasn't time to accept superficial apologies. Some lessons need to be learned in pain, in discomfort, in the shame of having judged someone so badly. Beatrice confided in me that they had had several serious discussions, that she had made it clear that his behavior was unacceptable, that if he didn't fundamentally change the way he treated people, especially me, she would have to rethink many things in their marriage. This worried me, because it was never my intention to cause problems between them, but at the same time I knew that certain truths needed to be told, certain patterns needed to be broken. My move happened 2 weeks after that conversation. The apartment I rented was beautiful, exactly the way I always wanted to have for myself. 2 bedrooms, a spacious living room with plenty of natural light, a modern kitchen, a balcony where I could have my breakfast looking at the trees on the street. For the first time in a long time, I felt I had a space that was truly mine, where I could be whoever I wanted to be without fear of judgment, without having to diminish myself to fit other people's expectations. The children were sad about my departure, but I promised they could visit me whenever they wanted, that Grandma's house would always be open to them. And I kept that promise religiously. Every weekend, Miguel and Isabella would come spend the day with me, and I made a point of creating special memories with them, things they will carry for the rest of their lives. As for Ricardo, it took a few months, but he eventually came to my apartment, alone, asking to talk. I received him, offered coffee, and we sat down for a long and difficult conversation. He apologized for real this time, not those shallow apologies he had tried to give in the beginning. He acknowledged he had been prejudiced, that he had judged my value only by the visible financial contribution I made, that he had been unable to see everything I really contributed with my presence, my work, my love for the family. He said the revelation about my financial situation had been a shock, but that the real learning hadn't been about the money. It had been about respect, about not judging people by appearance, about recognizing value where it exists, even when it's not obvious. I accepted his apologies, but made it clear that trust is rebuilt with time and actions, not with pretty words on an afternoon of regret. Today, almost a year after all this history, things are in a new balance, different, but healthy. I have my independence, my space, my life, but I continue to be an active part of the family. I see my grandchildren regularly, participate in Sunday lunches, but now it's a choice, not an obligation or dependence. Ricardo treats me with genuine respect now, and I noticed he learned to value not only financial contributions, but the intangible value that each person brings to a family. Beatrice told me he changed in other aspects, too, that he's more attentive to people's feelings around him, more humble in his assessments of others. And look, I'm not going to lie saying I don't feel a deep satisfaction knowing that my attitude, as painful as it was for all of us at the moment, ended up generating a real and lasting transformation. But you know what was most interesting in all this journey? It was discovering who I really was underneath all those layers of submission and invisibility I had built over the years. Because the truth is, I had gotten used to being small, to occupying little space, to not bothering anyone, to not shining too much so as not to overshadow anyone. And when I finally allowed myself to show my real dimension, when I finally stopped hiding my achievements and my intelligence, I discovered a Helena I had forgotten existed. That young woman who worked at the export company and dreamed big, who wasn't afraid to take risks, who trusted her own capability. That Helena had been dormant for decades, hidden behind the role of wife, of mother-in-law, of grandmother, as if these roles were all I could be. But they weren't. I was much more than that, always was, and I was finally allowing myself to recognize and celebrate it. And here's something many people don't understand. It wasn't the money that gave me power in that situation. The money was just the tangible proof, the physical document I could put on the table to force a conversation that needed to happen. But the real power came from me, finally deciding I wasn't going to accept being treated as less than I really was anymore. It came from choosing my own dignity above the family's superficial peace. It came from being willing to cause discomfort, to break patterns, to say no when necessary. How many of us, women of my generation, and even younger generations, spend our entire lives swallowing disrespect because we don't want to be seen as problematic, as dramatic, as exaggerated? How many times do we accept crumbs of consideration when we deserved banquets of recognition? I did this for years, and look where it got me. Being called dead weight by my own son-in-law, who directly benefited from my generosity. In the months following my move, something interesting started happening. Other women in the family, friends, neighbors, started looking for me to talk. It seems the story had spread, as these things always spread in close communities, and suddenly I found myself being seen as a kind of example, of inspiration. Older women told me their own stories of invisibility and disrespect, of how they also felt like burdens in their children's houses, as if they had passed their expiration date. Younger women asked me for advice about financial independence, about how to invest, about how to protect themselves so they wouldn't be vulnerable in the future. And I shared everything I knew, without reservations, because I realized my story wasn't just mine. It was the story of millions of women who are undervalued, made invisible, treated as disposable, after a lifetime of service and sacrifice. One of these women was Donna Margarita, a 70-year-old lady who lived with her son and daughter-in-law. She came to me crying one of those days, saying her situation was similar to mine, but that she didn't have money saved, didn't have anything to prove her value beyond decades of unpaid domestic work. And you know what I told her? I told her she didn't need money to have value, that her work had intrinsic value, that taking care of a house, of children, of an entire family wasn't less important than earning a salary, and that she had every right to demand respect even without a robust bank account to show. I helped her have a difficult conversation with her son. I was there beside her giving moral support, and today her situation has improved significantly. Her son, like Ricardo, just needed an awakening, someone to make him see what was right in front of his eyes all along. And as for my investments, you must be curious about what I did with them, right? Well, I finally started using that money for myself, to realize dreams I had postponed for decades. I always wanted to travel, see new places, but during my marriage with Antonio, this was never a priority. There was always some house renovation, some bill to pay, some child needing something. So I started traveling. I went to the Northeast, saw those beautiful beaches I only saw in magazines. I went to Europe, fulfilled the dream of visiting Paris, of climbing the Eiffel Tower, of walking through the streets of Rome. And on each trip, I felt more alive, more myself, as if each new experience was filling a void I didn't even know existed inside me. I also invested in education, in things I always wanted to learn but never had time for. I took an art history course, because I always loved painting but had never formally studied the subject. I started dance classes, because I always wanted to dance but was embarrassed to move in public. And each new skill I acquired, each new knowledge I absorbed, made me feel more complete, more capable, more confident. I was rediscovering myself at 63 years old, and there was nothing sad about it, on the contrary. There was something deeply liberating in realizing it's never too late to reinvent yourself, to expand, to become an even better version of who you already are. As for the land I had bought 20 years ago, I decided to sell one of them. The region had developed a lot, and I received an excellent offer from a construction company that wanted to build a residential building there. With the money from the sale, I did something that made me extremely proud. I created a small investment fund for my grandchildren. I set aside a significant amount for each of them, which will remain invested earning returns until they turn 18. When they reach that age, they'll have considerable assets waiting for them, whether to pay for college, to start a business, for a down payment on a house, for whatever they want. And this time, I left everything documented, everything explained, so they know exactly where that money came from, so they know their grandmother worked hard and invested intelligently to give them this gift. I want them to grow up knowing that ordinary people can build wealth with discipline and financial education, and I want them to especially value the women in the family, to never underestimate someone by appearance or the social position they occupy. The other piece of land I decided to keep. It's a kind of security for the future, a value reserve that continues to appreciate. Who knows, maybe one day I'll build something there. Maybe a small country house where I can spend weekends, a refuge just for me. Or maybe I'll leave it as an inheritance for my children, already properly documented and explained so there are no doubts or conflicts in the future. The important thing is that now I make these decisions thinking also about myself, about what I want, about what makes me happy, not just about what's best for others. The relationship with Beatrice also changed, and for the better. We became closer, more honest with each other. She told me she felt guilty for not having noticed how her husband was treating me, for having been so absorbed in her own routine that she ended up neglecting my well-being. I explained it wasn't her fault, that I had become a specialist in hiding my feelings, in pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. But we agreed that from then on we would be more open, more communicative, that we wouldn't let things accumulate until they exploded anymore, and we have honored that agreement. Now when something bothers me, I speak up. When she needs help, she asks directly, without waiting for me to guess. It's a healthier, more mature, more respectful dynamic on both sides. And you know something funny? After I left their house, after I made it clear I had my own life and my own independence, Ricardo started to truly value me. Not because I had money, but because he finally understood that my presence there wasn't my obligation, nor a favor he was doing me, but rather a choice I made out of love for the family. And when you understand that something is a choice and not an obligation, you automatically start to value it more. Now when I go visit them, he makes a point of receiving me well, of asking how I am, of showing genuine interest in my life. We're still far from having a close or warm relationship, but at least now there's mutual respect, and that's already much more than we had before. The children, my beloved grandchildren, also understood the situation in their own way. Miguel, who's now 9 years old, one day asked me why I went to live alone. I crouched down to his height, looked him in the eyes and said, "Because sometimes people need to have their own space, their own little corner in the world, even when they love their family very much. This doesn't mean Grandma doesn't love you. It just means Grandma also needs to take care of herself." He thought for a bit and responded, "I understand, Grandma. It's like when I need to spend some time alone in my room after playing a lot with Isabella." I smiled and said that was exactly it. Children have an incredible capacity to understand complex truths when you take the trouble to explain at their level. Looking back now, at this entire journey since that fateful Sunday when I heard the words, "dead weight," I can't feel regret. Of course it was painful. Of course there were moments when I wondered if it wouldn't be easier to simply keep swallowing everything in silence, keep being invisible to maintain peace. But today, I understand that wouldn't be real peace. It would just be the absence of visible conflict while I died a little inside every day. True peace, the kind that really matters, comes from you being in harmony with your own values, from not having to deny who you are to fit others' expectations, from being able to sleep at night knowing you're living with integrity and dignity. And there's another important thing I learned from all this. Silence isn't always virtue. There's a difference between being discreet and being omissive, between being humble and being self-deprecating. I spent years confusing these things, thinking it was noble to hide my achievements, that it was virtuous not to talk about my success, that it was humble to pretend to be smaller than I really was. But what did this cause? It caused misunderstandings. It caused disrespect. It caused a situation where I was being harmed precisely because nobody knew the truth about who I was. So my advice to anyone listening to me now, especially to women who are so often taught to be small and quiet, don't be afraid to occupy space. Don't be ashamed to celebrate your achievements. Don't make yourselves smaller so others feel bigger. Your value doesn't diminish when you recognize and declare it. On the contrary, only then can others recognize it too. Today, when I look at that shoebox where I kept my secrets, it's empty. The documents are now organized in appropriate folders, filed professionally, accessible whenever I need them. But more important than that, the secrets I carried inside me, that need to hide myself, to diminish myself, to be invisible, those are gone too. I don't need to hide anymore. I can be fully who I am, with all my achievements, with all my intelligence, with all my capability, without fear that this will bother someone. And if it does bother, well, that says more about the other person's insecurity than about me. The story could have had a different ending. I could have simply left that house in silence, hurt, wounded, taking with me the grief and resentment, never giving a chance for there to be learning or transformation. But I chose to confront the situation head-on, chose to use the truth as a tool for transformation, and that made all the difference. Because today, a year later, I don't just have my independence and my dignity back. I also have a family that learned valuable lessons about respect, about value, about not judging people by the surface. Ricardo learned, Beatrice learned, and my grandchildren are growing up in an environment where these lessons are being taught and practiced every day. And to you who are listening to me now, whoever you are, in whatever situation you're living, I want to leave a message. You have value. You always had and always will, regardless of having money in the bank or not, regardless of having documents to prove it or not, regardless of someone recognizing it or not. Your value is intrinsic, comes from who you are, from what you've done, from the people you've loved, from the sacrifices you chose to make. And if someone in your life can't see this, if someone treats you like dead weight, like a burden, like someone disposable, then maybe it's time to do what I did. Show your true dimension, occupy your space, demand the respect you deserve. Not to prove anything to anyone, but to prove to yourself that you're not going to accept less than you deserve anymore. Life is too short for us to spend it feeling small, invisible, devalued. Life is too precious to waste in relationships where we're not respected. And never, never is it too late to change your story, to rewrite your role, to stand up and say, enough. I deserve more. I am more. And from now on, I'm going to live as who I really am. That's what I did at 63 years old. And if I could do it, you can too. No matter your age, no matter your situation, no matter how long you've been accepting crumbs when you deserve the complete banquet, today can be the day you decide you deserve more. Today can be the day you take those documents hidden at the bottom of the drawer, whether they're literal or metaphorical, and show the world who you really are. And now, I want to hear from you. I want you to leave a comment down here telling me, have you ever been through a similar situation? Have you ever felt invisible, devalued, as if you had no importance? What did you do? Or what are you thinking of doing about it? I read all the comments personally and respond as much as I can, because for me it's very important to create this support network, this space, where people can share their stories without judgment, where we can learn from each other and strengthen each other mutually. And if this story touched you in some way, if you felt there was something here you needed to hear, please leave your like. It helps me reach more people who might need to hear exactly this message today. And subscribe to the channel because I have many more stories to share, many more lessons I learned on this journey called life. And I would love to have you following each step of this walk with me. Until the next story, and always remember, you are not dead weight. You are a living, pulsing, valuable force. and you deserve to be treated as such.